Hi, I'm Kristen, and my action research project is titled The Effects of Digital Learning Materials on Student Engagement and Content Retention in Mathematics. I decided on this research topic because, as we all know, technology has been rapidly evolving, especially over the past couple of decades, and as a result, technology is becoming more and more integrated into educational environments. And this was especially interesting to me because when I first returned to the middle school and high school environments as a student teacher, I was very surprised at the amount of digital tools that were being used in the classroom each day because I felt like it was a really significant increase from when I had been a student myself, which at the time had just been 4 years earlier. Especially with the use of Chromebooks, like the students just generally assumed that all of the work that they were going to be doing was going to be done on their Chromebooks, and I always felt like if that had been the case when I was a student, I don't think that I would have liked it. Like I felt that I personally would have preferred to do things on paper rather than on a Chromebook. So I decided on this research topic to see if this massive increase in technology in the classroom truly does benefit the students. My main research question was how does switching from paper learning materials to digital learning materials impact student engagement and content retention in mathematics? And I also wanted to answer the following three sub-questions. How will switching to digital materials impact student participation? How will switching to digital materials impact homework completion and test scores? And how will switching to digital materials impact student motivation and stress levels? So I reviewed several papers that had previously been written on this subject and on related subjects. And I found that many studies had concluded that switching to a completely paperless classroom will lead to an increase in production, an increase in achievement, and an increase in test scores. And these studies also found that the majority of students, as well as the majority of teachers, preferred using digital materials instead of paper ones for various reasons. The switch to digital materials meant that no one had to carry around big stacks of paper, and just in class, not having to hand out the paper materials would save a lot of time. And technology was also, in many cases, used as a way of motivating students to do their work more efficiently. There were concerns, however, mainly from teachers who thought that the constant use of technology would prove to be a distraction to the students and that students would maybe take advantage of their technology privileges and, use their Chromebooks or their tablets or whatever to kind of do things that they weren't supposed to be doing in class. So for this study, I teamed up with a former colleague of mine who was kind enough to let me use her students as my participants since I do not teach in a classroom myself. So the class that I worked with was a seventh grade accelerated math class consisting of 26 students. And over the course of 4 weeks, any materials that were distributed to the students were given to them digitally as digital files that they could access through their Chromebooks rather than materials being printed on paper. So this included any notes, any tests or quizzes, any homework assignments, anything at all that the teacher was sharing with the students was all digital rather than on paper. And throughout this, I was in constant communication with the classroom teacher to help with just planning and to collect any data that I could get. The students were given surveys to gauge their feelings and their attitudes toward the switch to a paperless classroom. This survey was conducted once right at the beginning of the study, once in the middle of the study, and then once after the study had been completed. I collected any anecdotal evidence that the teacher could provide me with. I had specific interview questions that I asked the teacher, and I also recorded the results of a pre-test and a post-test that the students took so that I could compare the test scores. Of course, this study was limited by the fact that I was not physically present in the classroom, which meant that I couldn't really see for myself how things were going and how the students were reacting. And so I just had to trust that the teacher was sharing all of the relevant information with me that I needed, and I had to trust that the students were taking their survey seriously and answering the questions honestly rather than just kind of picking whatever answer so they could get done with it. I also went into this study with the major assumption that every student would be comfortable using technology and would be well versed in how to use their Chromebooks. I assumed this because technology is so ubiquitous these days that I can't really imagine that these students would have gotten this far without having to use computers in their schoolwork, but of course, that is just an assumption. So after the 4 weeks of collecting data, I found that the digital learning materials did lead to an increase in test scores. This was based on the pre-test and post-test scores that I recorded, which I ran a paired t-test on the two sets of data, and I found that the scores had increased by a significant margin. And I also found that, according to the teachers' reports, as well as what the students self-reported on the surveys that they took, that there was a slight increase in class participation during discussions. The teacher noted that there were several students who had previously been pretty quiet in class who did start to participate more frequently after the switch was made to a paperless classroom. I also tracked homework completion by having the teacher keep a log of how many students failed to complete their homework each day. And we found that on average, the rate of missing homework was right around where it had always been. So that wasn't really impacted by the switch to digital materials. But the student surveys also found that many of the students felt more motivated to complete their work now that they were using digital materials. And the majority of students also reported that they did not feel any sort of stress caused by having to learn in a paperless classroom. So, in conclusion, using digital materials in the classroom does have a positive impact on students. And after this whole experience, the teacher that I worked with did tell me that she plans to incorporate many more digital materials in her classroom going forward, and hopefully she will continue to see these positive impacts.